Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Codes Clips. I'm John Wascavage. Today I'm going to talk to you about guardrails on decks and elevated platforms. Now there's some requirements that are required for guardrails. One being it needs to be at least 36 inches high when you're dealing with a drop over 30 inches high. So as you can see here, we're pretty well up and elevated above the deck surface. So we're going to check this deck here for guardrail requirements. Now, there's a couple of requirements, one being 36 inches high for residential. And as you could see here, we're over 36 inches. It passes the height requirement. And the spacing between guard members shall not allow the passage of a 4-inch sphere. Now I have a 4-inch sphere here. Meets the requirement. Now this requirement changed in 1995. Prior to the 1995 code, the spacing here was 6 inches. Now they changed it because small children were getting their heads stuck in between. So they lowered the spacing. This simulates a small child's head. And we haven't had any code changes since 95. So it's working. So let's go to Sam now. That's all I have to talk about with guards and decks. Let's go to Sam. He's going to talk a little bit about window wells.
Hello. Today we're going to be talking about window wells. The building code changed years ago and made it a requirement to have an exit in every basement that goes to the outside. Generally this is met with a window well. Then sometimes that requirement is also met with just a sliding door or an exit door, but that's only if grade is available to make that. These are typically more common, and they're used for emergency exiting. A few of the important measurements we look for when we're looking at this are sill height. It needs to be under 44 inches. Now that's important because you're going to be climbing out of the window, so that's why that sill has to be a certain height. The window opening also has to be large enough, and this is called a clear opening because it's measured from the actual opening that's created when the window's here. That needs to be at least 20 inches wide and generally 24 inches high. Now this window is big and has plenty of room for someone to climb out. The reason why those numbers are important is that this opening is big enough to climb out. There's a formula where that has to equal 5 square foot if it's a subgrade or an at-grade window used for emergency escape. If it's a second floor window, it actually needs to be bigger, and that's usually for fireman access, and that's 5.7 square foot. So another important thing with window wells is we look at the outside, we look at the ladder. You have to have a ladder with a certain distance between the rungs so that you're able to climb out. And as you can see, this window is very easy to climb in and out of, and that's why it meets code. So we're gonna go to Mike in at the office.
Hey Sam, that's certainly some great information for our residents. Welcome back to another edition of Codes Enforcement's Codes Clips section. Last month we talked a little bit about an ordinance and like how it evolves from an idea that we see or a problem we see out in the community all the way through, a draft ordinance and eventually the adoption through our Board of Supervisors. Although this is an important step, without enforcement, it just remains strictly a concept. So that's kind of where I come in. As the codes enforcement officer at Silver Spring Township, I'm tasked with ensuring all that our ordinances are enforced and ensuring that our citizens have a safe community to live in and property values remain high based on, keeping these ordinances under control. As I mentioned last month, you can go to our website at SSTWP and go about halfway down and you'll find a tab there with all our ordinances, and you can review each and every one of them and see what the stipulations are. One such ordinance I want to talk about this month is our property maintenance ordinance and how we regulate and enforce that. Our property maintenance ordinance basically deals with what you can and cannot have on your property. There's some examples could be an old junk car or maybe some old construction materials all the way up to an accumulation of trash. Many times I'll spot these while I'm out driving around in the township, but I do ask that residents, give me a hand and give me some tips when they see a violation like our property maintenance ordinance being violated out in the township. They can either reach out to me via email, give me a phone call, or again, as I mentioned last week, go to our CRA, our Citizens Request for Action tab, and fill out a brief form and just give us a heads up about what's going on. Once I see these violations, I'll go out, I'll take a look at the applicable property, document it through a couple of photos, and determine the best course of action to take with the resident. This might be a quick knock at the door, leaving a door hanger, a business card, all the way up to issuing a formal notice of violation, which we send out in the mail. As you can imagine, this is not an exact process. It really depends on the severity of the situation, coupled kind of with our expectations of how quickly it can be resolved. For a typical violation, we usually provide 30 days in our notice of violation letter for a resident to abate the violation. Should we be unable to communicate with them, they still haven't abated the violation, or they're not willing to do so, at this point we might issue a citation. It's a basic non-traffic citation that we take down to the district court's office, where they process it and send it out to the resident via mail. Once the resident receives it in the mail, they'll have two options. One option is to plead guilty and abate the violation accordingly. The other option is to plead not guilty, and at that point they'll be issued a court date where they can plead their case to the judge and see what the judge has to say. During these court cases, we always ask for compliance. We're not really big on to asking for fines because ultimately our goal is to keep the community safe, clean, and in compliance with all our ordinances. As I mentioned earlier, protecting home values, public safety, and community cohesiveness is really at the heart of what we do. And this breakdown's a pretty standard practice for what we do in codes enforcement when violations come through. So you can imagine every situation varies, and we are very willing to work with our residents to resolve these problems. So, that's all I really have for this week. If you have any questions about this week's episode, please give me a call. I'd love to talk to you about it. But really appreciate you stopping by Codes Clips and look forward to another great episode next month.